dignity to leadership. You know that my heart cringes not just for our world today, but particularly for tomorrow. My passion for raising authentic and visionary leaders is undeniable in all that I do. I remember 2 years ago when I first spoke about the concept of my book, The Leadership Guardian, with one of my mentors. She asked, "What do you want people to feel after reading the book?" My answer was very clear. I want the readers to be sober, become more aware of their awesomeness, and be ignited for 360 degrees transformation in every area of their life. The reviews from the independent readers of the Leadership Guardian has been overwhelming. The Leadership Guardian is truly a transformational movement for those who are tired of mediocrity and are ready to lead a 360-degree transformation in their lives. While I cannot wait for this book to grace your shelves, I most importantly cannot wait for the Leadership Guardian to grace your hearts. Let me know from you today.
Hello, super leaders. Thank you for joining us again on Leadership Chats with Top Business Leaders. My name is Kemi Ogunkoya. I am a leadership development strategist, management consultant, and author. And I am super excited to have you with me on yet another show. I equip business leaders to develop the right competence for their leadership roles. I help them perform effectively in their current roles and also seamlessly take on higher positions. We are in the 6th week already of the Leadership Chats with Top Business Leaders. And if you are just joining this show for the very first time, the Leadership Chats with Top Business Leaders is a 12 weeks virtual event which holds every Saturday between 7 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. West African time and runs from the 15th May through the 31st of July 2021. And this series focuses on the elements of the dozen model, which is a leadership framework that I developed that consists of 12 key elements for effective and visionary leadership. And they include clarity, connection, character, confidence, consequence, community, consideration, critical thinking, communication, competence, commitment, and consistency. Every week, I bring to you top leaders, and over the next 12 weeks, to talk about different elements of this model and how you can interact with them for your personal and professional growth. And therefore, my guest today is Simbarashe Garaba, and we will examine leadership and competence. We're going to be talking about how to develop the right competence, and I have no doubt that this will be yet another transformational show. So let's get to meet Simbarashe. Simbarashe Garaba is lead strategic projects, business optimization, strategy, and business development for Mariswe, a civil consultancy firm with tentacles from South Africa to different African countries, and as such has undertaken infrastructure development projects in DRC, Ghana, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. He is passionate about the development of Africa, its people, and business strategy with a skill set backed on an MBA in strategy and corporate finance. He has a BSc in property development, and he has a whole lot of qualifications, amongst which is the PMP qualification. And today we're going to be talking about competence, and I guarantee that it will be a great show. So, Simbarashe, it's good to have you. Thank you for joining us today on the show.
Good evening, Kemi. How are you? Good evening to your viewers.
I'm very fine. I'm very fine. Thank you. So good to have you here today.
Thank you.
Let's get started. Now, when it comes to leadership, you got quite, an extensive experience, working across different countries in Africa and also, extending to other parts of the world. Now, what would you say exactly defines competence for a leader?
I think to start, actually, we should actually say leadership varies in different contexts. But the first thing is you need to look at leadership. When I look at leadership competencies, I think of leadership. Firstly, leadership of self. I look at leadership of teams, and also company or organizational leadership. The competencies across that structure all have different attributes that one needs to be able to extract from them. So if we're looking at leadership of self, you're now looking at things such as discipline. You're looking at things such as being able to be very introspective, amongst other things. When you look at being able to manage teams, how much of a communicator are you? How good a communicator are you? Are you able to resolve dynamic problems, political problems within the team itself? Are you able to handle such pressures? Can you create a structured environment within your teams? Then when you look at it from an organizational point of view, now you start looking at are you able to actually set strategy and get the company to rally behind it? Can you create management structures within a business? Can you create a culture of innovation for you to be able to maintain, and rather for you to be able to maintain the company's philosophy going forward? So for me, these are some of the attributes that you need, or competencies that you need to have. Now, if you come down to individuals, for instance, we look at things like emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and just natural intelligence, knowing what you know or what you don't know. So these are attributes that are there. So you need to be able to look at competencies at the different levels of operation, and then also look at them from what context. Not all competencies are required by leaders, or rather, not all competencies fit for all contexts of leadership.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And I love how you have been able to break them down into different pockets. So I'd like us to start with the personal dimension, right? So you have spoken about quite a lot of things, around self-awareness to other areas that are really important for leaders to be able to lead themselves. Because I personally believe that if you cannot lead yourself, then you will struggle to lead other people. And
Yes.
Another philosophy that I live by, or a principle that I live by, is that you cannot become great at what you do unless you become great at who you are. So it definitely stands from the place of self. So now let's look at it from the place of self. As a leader, what are some of the competencies? And I know that you have mentioned that competencies in this case is relative, because what every leader needs is totally different. But now let's look at some of the unifiers, right? Around elements that are totally non-negotiable for leaders. What are some of the competencies, that leaders have to be able to develop to succeed or to lead effectively in the personal dimension?
I think the one that is most understated, I'll start with the one that I think is the most understated, is the ability to introspect. We tend to go out there, depending on your leadership style, and direct, set strategy, get other teams to achieve certain objectives, but we don't take time to introspect. Because in introspection, that's when you go back, you go through the entire playbook to actually ascertain what you did, what you could do better. And that's how leadership, that's how you actually improve and self-correct as a leader. So introspection is very big for me. Another one that is very big for me is the ability to learn. As a leader, and Kemi, we're talking about self here. So as a leader, you need to have the ability to learn, to be continuously learning. Now, the learning and the application of learning is very key for me here, because leadership is about when you develop a particular behavior, and that behavior becomes a skill. Once it becomes a skill, then you can actually call it a competence. If you're looking at, say, you want to learn how to manage change, you can actually access the knowledge on how to manage change, but you cannot say you're a leader that knows how to do change because you haven't applied it. Because in the application, that's where certain nuances sit. Now you're thinking of the dynamics of the people that you're handling. So textbooks cannot teach you that. So, and if you don't do it over and over again, it does not become a behavior. And as a result, it doesn't turn into a skill that you actually have. Another thing that a leader needs to have, for me, is the ability to. You need to be flexible. You need to be able to adapt. You're constantly facing many different situations as you move as a leader, as an individual. So those for me, those items are the ones that I would consider very pivotal. Emotional intelligence. That I had to learn. I had an employer who made me actually understand what emotional intelligence looks like. The house could be burning and he would not blink an eye. The level of calmness that he brought to those situations actually managed to get everyone to have a sense of calm. And that I looked at as possibly the epitome of emotional intelligence. And obviously, because of that, I always remember him for that. So that, as a leader, you actually need to have the ability to communicate. That's non-negotiable. If you're leading people, you need to be able to communicate. If you're leading yourself, you actually need to have honest conversations with yourself. So for me, those are what I think pretty key.
You have raised really, really valid points, Simbarashe. And, I love the fact that you started with introspection. Because, as you rightly said, it's a key area that a lot of leaders do not pay so much attention to, right? And when I have conversations with leaders, sometimes I say, you know what, how much time do you make out for thinking, right? How much time do you spend at the end of the day to just review and then to reflect? And I bet that a lot of people, just assume that they are thinking. A lot of people assume that they reflect, but in reality, it's not given as much consideration as it should be. And really, when we're talking about how leaders can also develop great level of competence, there's no way you won't be able to develop competence if you cannot introspect, right? When you cannot have honest conversations with yourself, which also buttresses the points you made around emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is pretty much even just beyond being able to remain at a place of peace or being able to hold on to the core of who you are. It's also about how you can have honest conversations with yourself and you can say, you know what, this is where I am. I can talk about my strengths, I can talk about my growth areas, and I'm comfortable knowing that even as I progress on this journey of leadership, I have blind areas, I have, weaknesses, and, I'm comfortable just knowing that, and I'm on this journey of growth. So I really, really like how you spoke about the place of, introspection and then flexibility, and you also touching on emotional intelligence. So I want us to just focus a little bit more on emotional intelligence as we go on. And I'd like you to share from your experience, because you said you also had to learn about this from, a leader that you were opportune to work with who was able to remain calm in situations. Now, stepping out of that zone, how can leaders develop this great tool of emotional intelligence? How can they develop this skill?
Emotional intelligence is very deliberate because emotional intelligence touches on how you would naturally react to situations. So because it's something that for you to actually change that has to be a very deliberate action where you constantly check yourself. Sometimes you actually need to learn to be slow to speak, so that you actually first digest what has happened and stop your natural inclination to react to particular situations the way that you would have reacted to them, and start being deliberate and mindful of the way you act. Now, you actually need a blueprint on different situations. You know, when a colleague comes to you and says, look, my dad has died, what you need empathy. You actually need to know. So with emotional intelligence, you actually need to know how you need to react in different situations. So understanding that in certain scenarios, this is what I need to do, or I'm reacting in this way because I want to achieve A, B, C, D. It has to be very deliberate, and you actually need to start thinking of situations that you might find yourself in and how you would best react to get certain results. I, as an individual, I'm very process related. Maybe it's because of the field that I'm in. So I tend to have, from stakeholder maps to processes of how I act on certain things. I tend to do that a lot, and I think we mentioned introspection. If after certain instances when I react to certain things, I come back and think it over, and that's actually how you build emotional intelligence. You're not coming back to introspect from a point of regret. You're coming back to introspect from a point of self-correction. How could I have actually handled such a situation better? And as you go with time, you end up developing a certain level of emotional intelligence.
Awesome, awesome. So, so when you look at the dozen model, the framework with which we have designed this program, which is a leadership framework that I also adopt, for organizations and different systems and structures, there is, such an interwoven hand, in the relationship of each of the elements. So now we're talking about competency. We can talk about competency if we're not also able to talk about critical thinking. We can talk about competency if we are not able to talk about clarity, because you require some level of clarity to be able to know what areas you want to develop yourself around. So each of these is very important. Another key element on the model is consideration, is communication, and you have spoken about all of this in one way or the other. Now, looking at competence and character, right? Because there was, I did a poll sometimes last week or about 2 weeks ago where I tried open, would you hire for competence or would you hire for character? I would like you to share your thoughts on that, Simbarashe.
I would hire for character. But firstly, I must say that it also depends on the timeline. If I need an engineer to do a design for me, I'm not going to hire for your character. I need someone to make sure that this bridge does not collapse. Right. So there is no character. You hire for character when there is a long period or a substantial amount of time where you're saying, I can actually work on the flaws that you have from a competency executional point of view. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of having someone with great character, but doesn't have the right competencies. But however, if you're in an organization, if you're looking at it from an organizational point of view, you want to have character and competency. Now, the competency level might be slightly lower, so you don't hire the guy that has got the best technical skill. You hire the guy that has got the skill, but also has very good character. So I don't think you can separate the two, especially if you don't have time to teach. If you're coming out of, if we're looking at people that are coming out of university and are coming in straight into the job, then character is more important than competency. But as you go, character still remains important, but competency begins to play a very big part, depending on the type of position that you're hiring for. I'm not sure if I've articulated myself carefully there, but you actually need that balance. And in some
No,
cases,
you have.
sadly, character will not do the trick.
Will not do the trick, right? Yeah, because it was quite an interesting conversation, and this was premised really on an interaction that I had with quite a number of business leaders, top business leaders who were going to fill a particular spot within their organization for their top management, and then it was boiled down to two guys, right? And there was the conversation around, so who do we hire? There was a guy who was really good, but then was in terms of character wasn't so great. Has not left credible blueprints enough for people to trust him enough to hand over such responsibilities to him. And then there was this other guy who had great character, but then was not as competent. But in that instance, character won because they eventually brought on this guy with great character because they felt that he was going to be teachable, he could learn, and then he could develop greater level of competence. But I hear you clearly when you talk about the fact that there's so many things to also consider in that situation, which would be time, which would be what role, right? What role are you trying to fit with character, cut the short, and then how we're also able to look at it from the big picture to see what is important for us to fill this role at this point. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Simbarashe. Now, I'd like us now to move from the place of how can leaders really get to a place of comfort when it has to do with their competence. And by this, I mean that how can they get to that point where they can critically and objectively be able to review their own competence and know exactly what they need to do moving forward without sentiments or, bias as the case may be.
I think the very first thing is being able to actually ascertain, you as a leader, what type of context are you operating in? What type of skill set do you need in the area that you're operating in? What should you be able to do? For me, that is the first step. And that introspection then speaks to you saying, look, I do not have certain skills. And then that skills development process actually begins. Using myself as an example, I have my first role. I had my project manager and my cost engineer leave site, and that just left me alone. And there were competencies that I did not have. I'd never managed a project before, and I was a year and a half out of university. I quickly had to ascertain what I don't know, and it was a lot, and then start looking at how do I plug that in the quickest way possible. This project was running at a loss when I found it. I quickly had to bring in competencies that I didn't have, but then for me to bring those competencies in, I actually had to be mindful of what I could not do. It was a bit easy back then because it was a lot that I could not do.
Interesting. So for that to happen, Simbarashe, it means that, just like you said, you had to have honest conversations with yourself and then introspect, right? Now, let's look at it from the organizational context. How exactly are we able to have such conversations with people who unfortunately haven't gotten to that place where they can deal with their own, or who are not able to introspect really up onto the level where they can have such honest conversations with themselves. When we are in the workplace, how can we help them, accept whatever gaps that exist and get them to that place of comfort where they're willing to do what they have to do to bridge those gaps without necessarily making them feel threatened, or less of themselves?
I think this comes down to the conversation. I'm not sure what level I'll be pitching this at, but I'm just imagining the broad and in the belly of an organization. So not really right up at the top or right up at the bottom. When you have your performance reviews, that's where these conversations actually start. From what I notice from industry is that most middle managers actually don't know how to have that conversation, mostly because they are not equipped to have that type of a conversation. So how then would they be able to impact any form of knowledge in terms of leadership requirements going up when they themselves don't have it? So it should start from the top, where you actually have a leadership development program. Understanding that leadership development program does not mean just going into classes. It's actually reviewing that at what level are you in the organization, what skills do you need to have as an emerging leader within the organization, and then we actually start taking a look at how do you actually teach people. As you grow older, the method of impacting knowledge is not necessarily the same as you would when someone is in high school. Like I said early on, just giving content is not the answer. So then there has to be a process, a comfortable process, and a comfortable environment where that learning has to take place, and that's why these leadership development programs take place, where you learn those skills in a structured manner. If you don't have such structures, then you actually mostly leave people to their own devices, to their own ambitions, and that way you actually don't get a unified form of leadership, or you don't get guys having the leadership qualities that you as an organization can actually dictate.
Great. So, which means that a lot of this also depends heavily on the culture, or the climate within this organization to be able to provide this pathway for growth within their organizations, right?
Yes. You
All
find
right.
leaders in organizations that speak about growth and development, but to them it means, how many courses can I send Kemi a year? Or they look at it statistically from a budget point of view, that we are able to tell our shareholders that we spent 0.5% of our entire budget on learning and development. So we are building leaders within our organization. You're actually not. You're just sending someone to school. That doesn't do much if there isn't a structured development of the leadership within the business. If you're not carrying out certain activities that give you certain skills, then we're actually not talking about. When I talk about skills, I'm talking about leadership skills. If you don't have those skills, executable skills of leadership, then that organization is actually not doing any development. They are actually just educating. And when it comes to leadership, right, education is not the end of it all. It's just the beginning.
Fantastic. So I hold so strongly when you talk about structure, and then the difference between the leadership development programs and then education, which is really key. Now, Simbarashe, I would like you to talk about, how leaders can also develop that pathway for competence, because you talk about structure. So how can we as leaders on this personal journey of growth develop that pathway of leadership, such that you're constantly, so I say this, that leadership is a continuum. And by that, it means that the journey of leadership never ends and that we would never get to the point as leaders where we would exhaust the full spectrum of growth. And that means that we're constantly learning and unlearning. Now, if you would look at it in terms of a structure for a leader who is on a journey of growth, what exactly would you say should be the pathway for such structured growth based on a personal development plan, for example, such that thought leader doesn't get thrown in between the 1,000,001 distractions in our ever-changing and very dynamic world?
So, firstly, what I think should happen is, or rather, firstly, what I think we need to understand is, in businesses, in a business, there is efficiency and effectiveness. All right, just bear with me here. When we're talking about effectiveness, well, when we're talking about effectiveness, we're saying, look, can you meet the required matrix? Say we're talking about return on capital, all right, of 10%. Can we meet that matrix? If the answer is yes, that means that, and 10% was our plan matrix, that means that we are actually effective. Are we efficient? Could we actually do better than that? Now, most organizations set these goals and they can actually do better than that depending on how efficient they get. Now, to tie that back to creating a structure, there's always room to be able to put someone in a leadership position of sorts, but they need to be able to have comfort from the current leader, that's a comfortable environment where they can actually fail, but then not fail to the extent that we hinder the effectiveness of what the business is trying to achieve. It can affect the efficiency of it, but not the effectiveness. And as you get tasks and what do you call it? I think they call it, the technical term for it is, I think it's psychological safety, where you actually have an ability to make decisions and possibly fail. But however, those decisions that you make do not have the impact on an organization that you fail to be effective and achieve your primary goals. So that now looks at, now you're looking at a departmental stage, you're looking at the head of department, the responsibilities that are now passed on to the guy that's coming up, but then there's just a sign off from the head of the department that would be required. So the decision was made. When it comes to the HOD, he's not coming to change the decision. He's just coming to make sure that the right one has been made. So you're allowing someone to actually start making those decisions themselves. Then someone just ratifies them. As they grow in confidence, then more responsibilities get given to them as they learn, because in that process, they're actually learning. If something is wrong, they are able to get feedback in real time, in real environments, where you're not learning, you're not getting the skill from a crash course somewhere. This is in a real environment. So that is the structure that you would need to have at a departmental level, and that becomes a blueprint of an organization, depending on the level that you are, because it has to be leadership learning, but we also need to have a certain level of risk, to be risk averse.
I absolutely agree with you on that. Now, and that leads me to my next question, because what you have said now hinges a lot on how such a leader will be able to develop competence, really. Now, how would you say that, a leader can develop competence? What are some of the key things that they can do to achieve competence? And, one of the things that has drawn me to, asking you about this particular question is what you said about the pace of knowledge and then the pace of application. So we live in a world that people can access information very quickly, almost at the speed of light. but then there's a place of knowledge and there's a place of application. So, how exactly can leaders, or what are some of the things, in practical terms, that leaders can do to develop this level of competence that goes beyond just knowledge, but then also goes on to application?
Okay. I think to answer that, it actually speaks. Part of my response would be handled by what I said earlier on about creating a structured environment where your employer allows you to fail as you go up the ranks, and fail you will succeed as well, but we're basically hinging or hedging our risk going in, and that works as an organizational policy. Now, what I want to say is, I have for in my personal journey, I haven't always been. I've actually rarely. I don't think I actually have actually been given a chance to lead. I've always created um, created environment created environment where I can lead or highlight my leadership capabilities. This comes in part to the fact that most people, and chances are, Kimmy, some of the guys that are listening to your podcast now, the question would be, but I'm trying to lead in my company. I don't have the chance. So I went and got this MBA. I've got this qualification, but I don't get a chance to lead. That was my frustration in the beginning until someone said, look, if you can't if an environment doesn't give you what you want, create an environment that will. Right. And for me, that was saying, look, how do I create a path for myself? For other people, say, look, I'd like to be a leader. My company doesn't allow me to lead because maybe perhaps I'm too technical. Get involved in a nonprofit where you learn to lead. Get involved in create an environment that allows you to lead, that allows you to learn that leadership. Because in any business, you might find that there's maybe 20 of you, and maybe firstly your boss doesn't even like you. Now that has nothing to do with your leadership capabilities or the potential that you have. So create an environment, look for situations of leadership. Rather, look for situations where you can apply your leadership. Maybe your friend has got a business, volunteer there as a director of sorts. Access and learn that leadership in those environments. That way, you are not bound by saying, I'm in a position that does not create for leadership. It's actually your responsibility to seek an environment that allows you to lead. Everyone knows that there's such an environment. It's possible to find it. If you look hard enough, they
Create.
actually.
Right. Yeah, and I like what you just said now. If you look hard enough, right? And I absolutely attest to the fact that we always have these opportunities around us because we're social beings, So somehow we are connecting in different spaces, but it's so much around sometimes the fact that there are some misconceptions around leadership and its expression that just puts people in a place where even when these opportunities are right in front of their face, they just you know they just feel, what, it's probably not just for me, right? Or I'm not qualified to lead in this expression. So I love what you say when you say that you should find expression for leadership, volunteer somewhere, and people just start by leading yourself, right? You belong to a family, you work somewhere. A lot of people just think that leadership is about leading from the top. You want to be the manager, you want to be the CEO before you can start to explore or deploy your leadership skills. But right from where you are within the organization, you have certain roles, you have certain responsibilities, and sometimes you're also assigned certain tasks that should be an opportunity for you to showcase your leadership competence. So it's going to go way beyond people handing you some of these opportunities to you going out to show what you really are all about and what you can do. So does that summarize or does that cap what you have just said of Simbarashe?
No, I think it actually caps it quite nicely. I think you probably said it better than I did. It's leadership will not come to you. Some people have had these leadership behaviors trusted in them from an early age. I can attest to that. So for me, I've always had a hunger to lead. It's actually at a later stage when I discovered the what leadership actually means, that it's actually people. Above all else, it was people. Initially, when I started my journey, I thought being a leader means I'm powerful. But then I quickly learned that it's actually people. Leadership is mostly anchored on people. And that journey has taken me to where I am now.
That is such a great shift, thinking of leadership from a place of power and then understanding that it's about people. And I think this is something that we should never stop talking about to help people get to that point where they can demystify some of their thoughts, some of their beliefs around leadership, so that they can really step into the full place of power, duty, and responsibility as leaders. Now, as we wrap up this session, Simbarashe, I would like you to share with us some of the strategies that you consider to be effective, or that you consider to be essential for effective leadership.
Okay, for me, for effective leadership, empathy. Empathy, you need a lot of empathy, you need a lot of foresight. Empathy, foresight, the ability to manage people. For me, those are key elements. As well as I don't think I can ever understate emotional intelligence, because that helps. Think of managing teams. It's a big part of it. Once you've assembled a high performance team, you need a certain level of emotional intelligence to manage that team, because as a leader, it's people. Like I said, the best skill that you can have is being able to manage people, being able to communicate across spectrums, right from the top to the bottom. And that communication must be genuine. People can see a phony a mile away, and once you lose the trust that people have in you, then leadership is going to be very difficult. So that's how I feel about leadership, being able to move across the spectrum. Sometimes you're required to have a bigger picture, to look far into the future of how the organization is going to change, how we can infuse innovation as a culture and sustain it as a business. But you also need to be able to come down from looking at the balcony, to come down to understand, to say, the person that's making my coffee, how are they? And ask that question, actually being genuine. I think that's where that touches a bit on the empathy side. For me, that has gotten me I think that is the biggest thing that has gotten me to where I am. Everything else, school and the like, that anyone else can learn, and I did as well. It's being able to move across that spectrum. You will have people that are willing to bat for you, that will go all out, not for it. It's not the best form of leadership, that people are willing to go to bat for you as an individual and not the organization. That means something is wrong with the organizational culture, but that also means something is very right with you. People are willing to sacrifice their time for you. People are willing to invest into what you believe. If you're able to do that, if you're able to create that environment in your team and in your business, even in your family, then for me, then you're on your way to becoming a very successful leader. Now all you need is a great plan and support. Then you're all on your way.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So you have empathy and then you need a great plan and then support. Thank you so very much, Simbarashe. You have shared really amazing tips, nuggets, and I'm sure that everyone who has joined the call today has definitely gained valuable insights. But like I always say, that insights without actions will always be useless. So you want to run with these key insights so that you can achieve better effectiveness as a leader. So thank you very much, Simbarashe. I will see you soon again. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks to your listeners for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, guys. So we have had a great and amazing time with Simbarashe. And like I said, insights without actions will always be useless. So you want to take all these lessons, these insights, and run with it immediately. So look out for the next show that comes up next week, Saturday. We cannot wait to have great and amazing conversations again as leaders. So till I see you again, keep leading, keep inspiring. Take care. Bye.